girl runs into the church carrying a baby. Upon discovering the reason, the priest immediately canceled the mass. The May sun spilled over the cobbled streets of Triana, tinting the whitewashed facades and the geraniums hanging from the balconies in gold. It was Sunday, and the civilian neighborhood awoke with the laziness typical of a day of rest. The few early risers heading to the Church of Our Lady of O walked leisurely, greeting each other familiarly, their footsteps blending with the distant ringing of bells. Lucia woke up with a start, her heart pounding. She looked at the old alarm clock on her nightstand, 9:15. She had overslept. She jumped out of bed, cursing under her breath, something her mother wouldn't approve of if she heard. But her mother wouldn't hear her, not today. "Miguel," she called softly, entering the adjoining room. Her 2-year-old little brother was sleeping peacefully in his crib, oblivious to the world and its worries. Lucia watched him for a moment, allowing herself a small smile. Then, with the efficiency of someone who had to grow up too fast, she began the routine of every morning. While changing Miguel and preparing his bottle, Lucia couldn't help but cast furtive glances toward the closed room at the end of the hallway. The silence emanating from there was oppressive, loaded with a tension the 12-year-old felt in every fiber of her being. "Come on, Miguelito," she murmured, lifting her brother into her arms. "We need to go see Mom." With cautious steps, Lucia approached the closed door. She took a deep breath, preparing herself for what she might find on the other side. It was always like this lately. Every morning an emotional roulette. "Mom," she called softly, pushing the door open. The room was dim, the curtains drawn, blocking out the sunlight. On the bed, barely visible under a pile of blankets, lay Marta. Her breathing was shallow, almost imperceptible. Lucia approached, setting Miguel on the floor. The little one, sensing the tension in the air, remained unusually still, his large eyes fixed on the still figure of their mother. "Mom, it's time to wake up," Lucia said, gently touching Marta's shoulder. There was no response. "Mom, please!" Panic began to rise in Lucia's chest. This wasn't like other mornings. Something was wrong. Very wrong. "Mom!" she shouted, shaking Marta harder. Her mother's head moved lifelessly on the pillow, her skin pale and covered in cold sweat. Miguel, scared by his sister's shout, began to cry. The sound seemed to snap Lucia out of her stupor. With trembling hands, she reached for the phone on the nightstand and dialed the emergency number. The minutes that followed were a blur of frantic activity. The ambulance arriving, the paramedics rushing into the small apartment, the questions that Lucia could barely answer between sobs. And then, the deafening silence when they took Marta away on a stretcher, leaving Lucia and Miguel alone in an apartment that suddenly felt too big and empty. It was Mrs. Dolores, the neighbor from the downstairs apartment, who arrived first, drawn by the commotion. "Oh, my dear," she exclaimed when she saw Lucia, pale and trembling, holding on to Miguel as if he were a lifeline. "What happened?" Lucia opened her mouth to respond, but the words wouldn't come out. Instead, a heart-wrenching sob escaped her throat, releasing all the tension and fear she had been holding in. Mrs. Dolores needed no further explanation. With the efficiency of someone who had lived long enough to know what to do in a crisis, she took control of the situation. "Come on, sweetheart," she said, guiding Lucia to the couch. "Sit here with your brother. I'll make a few calls." While Mrs. Dolores spoke softly on the phone, Lucia sat, gently rocking Miguel on her lap. Her mind was a whirlwind of thoughts and fears. What if her mother didn't come back this time? What would become of them? Social services had already been asking questions, and Lucia knew the only reason she and Miguel were still together was because their mother insisted she could take care of them. It was then that her eyes landed on the small statue of the Virgin of Hope that stood in the living room. It had been a gift from her grandmother before she, too, passed away. Lucia had never been particularly religious, but at that moment, desperate to cling to something, anything, she found herself praying silently. "Please," she whispered, her eyes fixed on the serene face of the Virgin. "Please, help us." The sound of the door opening snapped her out of her improvised prayer. Mrs. Dolores came back in, her face a mix of concern and determination. "Lucia, dear," she said, sitting next to her. "I spoke to Father Antonio. He's in Mass right now, but I told him what happened. He says you should go to the church as soon as you can. He'll know what to do." Lucia nodded, feeling for the first time that morning like she had a purpose, a direction. She stood up, still holding Miguel in her arms. "Thank you, Mrs. Dolores. Can you—" "Don't worry, my dear," the neighbor interrupted, understanding the unspoken question. "I'll stay here in case the hospital calls. You go to the church." With one last glance at the statue of the Virgin, Lucia left the apartment. The sun hit her hard as she stepped out onto the street, as if the world continued turning, oblivious to her pain. For a moment, she stood paralyzed, overwhelmed by the normalcy of everything around her. Neighbors walking by, tourists taking pictures, the smell of coffee and churros wafting from the cafe on the corner. How could everything remain the same when her world was falling apart? But there was no time for reflection. With Miguel firmly held against her chest, Lucia began to run. Her bare feet, in the rush, she had forgotten to put on shoes, hit the hot pavement, but she barely noticed. Her mind was fixed on one goal, reaching the church, finding Father Antonio. The streets of Triana blurred as she ran. Some neighbors called out to her, concerned at seeing her in such a state, but Lucia didn't stop. Only when she reached the doors of the Church of Our Lady of O did she slow down. For a moment she hesitated. The Mass would be in full swing, and the thought of interrupting seemed almost sacrilegious. But the memory of her mother, pale and motionless in bed, gave her the courage she needed. With one last deep breath, Lucia pushed open the heavy wooden doors and ran into the church, Miguel's cries breaking the solemn silence of the sacred space. "Father Antonio," she shouted, her voice cracking from the effort and emotion. "Oh, it's Mom. She's... And so, on that Sunday that had begun like any other, the lives of Lucia, Father Antonio, and the entire Triana community were about to change forever. Because sometimes, it is in the darkest moments that the light of hope shines brightest. The silence that followed Lucia's desperate cry in the church was brief but intense. All eyes turned to the small, panting figure at the entrance, with her brother crying in her arms. Father Antonio, interrupted in the middle of his homily, did not hesitate for a second. With surprising agility for his age, he descended from the pulpit and hurried toward Lucia. "Calm down, daughter," he said, placing a comforting hand on the girl's shoulder. "Take a deep breath and tell me what happened." Lucia, between sobs, managed to explain the situation. Father Antonio's face darkened with each word, but he remained calm for the girl's sake. "Brothers," he addressed the congregation, "our community is in need. The Mass is suspended." A murmur of concern swept through the church, but it quickly transformed into a chorus of offers to help. Doña Carmen, the baker, was the first to step forward. "I'll take care of the little one," she said, extending her arms toward Miguel. Though hesitant, Lucia allowed the woman to take her brother. Ramon, a young man recently graduated and struggling to find work, offered to drive them to the hospital in his car. "It's old, but it'll get us there fast," he assured, already holding the keys in his hand. As they rushed out of the church, Father Antonio noticed that Lucia was clutching something in her hand, the small medal of the Virgin of Hope she always carried with her. She was gripping it so tightly her knuckles were white. The drive to the hospital was a blur of streets and traffic lights. Ramon drove with determination, skillfully navigating the Sunday traffic. In the back seat, Lucia clung to Father Antonio, her small body trembling with each sob. "Have faith, little one," the priest murmured, gently stroking Lucia's hair. "Hope never abandons us." When they arrived at the hospital, reality hit them hard. The emergency room was chaotic, full of people waiting to be seen. Father Antonio approached the information desk, his clerical collar helping him cut through the crowd. "We're looking for Marta Rodriguez," he said firmly. "She was brought in by ambulance this morning." The nurse typed into her computer, her face a mask of professional efficiency. She's in intensive care," she informed. "Only direct family can go in." Lucia stepped forward, her chin trembling but her eyes filled with determination. "I'm her daughter." The nurse looked at her with a mix of compassion and doubt. "I'm sorry, sweetheart, but you're a minor. We need an adult." That's when Father Antonio intervened. "I'm her temporary guardian," he said with authority that left no room for argument. "The girl is coming with me." The nurse hesitated for a moment, but something in the priest's gaze convinced her. "Very well," she relented. "But only you two." Ramon nodded, understanding. "I'll wait here," he said, "and I'll let the others know." The hallway to the ICU seemed endless. The smell of disinfectant and the hum of machines created an unreal atmosphere. Lucia walked as if in a trance, her hand firmly gripping Father Antonio's. Finally, they reached Marta's room. Through the glass, Lucia saw her mother, connected to a web of tubes and wires, her chest rising and falling in sync with a respirator. She looked so small and fragile in that hospital bed. A doctor intercepted them before they could enter. His face was serious, his eyes tired behind his glasses. "I'm Dr. Vasquez," he introduced himself. "Are you family of Mrs. Rodriguez?" Father Antonio nodded, introducing himself and Lucia. The doctor looked at them sympathetically before continuing. "The situation is critical," he explained in a soft but firm voice. "The cancer has spread more than we thought. We're doing everything we can, but—" His voice trailed off, calm, but the message was clear. Lucia felt the ground beneath her give way. She tightened her grip on Father Antonio's hand, desperately searching for something, anything to hold on to. Is there any hope?" the priest asked, his voice barely a whisper. Dr. Vasquez hesitated. "There is a new treatment," he finally said. "It's experimental and very expensive. The hospital is trying to include her in a pilot program, but the bureaucracy—" Lucia didn't hear anything after that. Her mind had fixated on one word: hope. Without thinking, she pulled the medal of the Virgin of Hope from her pocket and pressed it against her chest. "We can raise the money," she said suddenly, her voice surprisingly firm. "Right, Father?" Father Antonio looked at the girl, surprised by her determination. Then he turned to the doctor, who observed them with a mix of compassion and skepticism. "We'll do whatever it takes," the priest finally said. "How much time do we have?" "Every minute counts, keen Dr. Vasquez replied. "But if we're going to try this treatment, we need an answer within a week." 1 week. 7 days to raise what was likely an astronomical sum. Father Antonio felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. But when he looked at Lucia, he saw a spark of hope in her eyes that he couldn't ignore. "A week will be enough," he said, silently praying that his words were true. The following days were a whirlwind of activity in Triana. Word of Marta's situation spread like wildfire through the neighborhood, and the response was immediate. Father Antonio turned the church into a command center, coordinating efforts and raising funds. Doña Carmen organized an unprecedented bake sale, baking day and night. Ramon used his newly acquired digital marketing skills to create a social media campaign. Even the notoriously stingy owner of the bar on the corner offered the day's total sales. Lucia, for her part, became the heart of the operation. Despite her age, she worked tirelessly, handing out flyers, helping at fundraising events, and visiting her mother at the hospital whenever she could. At night, exhausted but determined, she prayed in front of the statue of the Virgin of Hope in the church. "Please," she whispered each night, "give us a miracle." As the days passed, the amount raised grew, but not fast enough. Midweek, Father Antonio met with Lucia in the sacristy. His face was marked with worry and exhaustion. "Lucia, my child," he began, choosing his words carefully. "You've been very brave, and everyone in the neighborhood has been incredibly generous. But it's not enough, is it?" Lucia interrupted, her voice surprisingly calm. Father Antonio nodded regretfully. "We're still short more than half, and we only have 3 days left." Lucia remained silent for a moment, her mind racing. Then, suddenly, her eyes lit up. "The procession," she said. "The procession of the Virgin of Hope." Father Antonio looked at her, confused. What about the procession?" "Let's move it up," Lucia explained, her voice gaining enthusiasm. "Instead of waiting for the usual date, let's do it this Sunday. We can ask for donations during the procession. The whole neighborhood will be there, and even people from outside will come to watch." The priest's mouth dropped open. The idea was bold, almost reckless. Moving up such an important procession, changing a centuries-old tradition. And yet, as he looked at Lucia with her eyes shining with hope and determination, he knew he couldn't refuse. "It'll be complicated," he warned. "And we'll need to convince the Brotherhood, get permits from the city." "We'll make it happen," Lucia interrupted, with a confidence beyond her years. "We have to, for Mom." Father Antonio felt a surge of pride and admiration for this girl who refused to give up. Placing a hand on her shoulder, he nodded. "So be it," he said. May the Virgin of Hope guide us. The next 2 days were a frenzy of frantic activity. Father Antonio moved heaven and earth to get the necessary permits, using every contact and favor he'd accumulated over the years. The Brotherhood, initially hesitant, was moved by Lucia's story and eventually agreed. The entire neighborhood mobilized. The women sewed at a breakneck pace to finish the Virgin's mantle. The men worked day and night to prepare the float. The children rehearsed with their drums and trumpets. And in the middle of it all was Lucia, tireless, inspiring, moving from place to place, helping wherever she could, encouraging those who faltered. Every night, no matter how late, she visited her mother in the hospital. "Hang on, Mom," she whispered, holding Marta's limp hand. "Just a little longer. On Sunday we'll have a miracle." Sunday morning dawned bright, as if the heavens themselves wanted to contribute to the effort. From early on, the streets of Triana filled with people, neighbors, tourists, and curious onlookers drawn by the news of the extraordinary procession. In the Church of Our Lady of O, Father Antonio was putting the final touches on his homily, when Lucia came running in, her face a mix of emotions. "Father," she gasped, "the hospital called. Mom. Mom has woken up." The priest felt his heart skip a beat. "Is she?" "Weak," Lucia answered, "but conscious. She wants to see the procession." A smile spread across Father Antonio's face. Then he said, "Let's give her a spectacle she'll never forget." The procession was unlike any Triana had ever seen. The float of the Virgin of Hope, resplendent under the morning sun, moved slowly through the streets of the neighborhood. Around it, a sea of people moved, prayed, cried, and above all, donated. Collection cans passed from hand to hand, filling at an astonishing rate. Elderly women offered their pensions, children emptied their piggy banks, and tourists, moved by the story, handed over high-value bills. And there, right behind the float, walked Lucia. With the medal of the Virgin gleaming on her chest, she moved with her head held high, her eyes fixed on the figure of hope that loomed ahead of her. When the procession passed by the hospital, Lucia saw her mother. Marta was in a wheelchair by the window, pale and gaunt, but with a smile on her lips and tears in her eyes. Their gazes met, and in that moment, Lucia knew that, no matter what happened, everything would be okay. As evening fell, when the Virgin returned to the church amidst cheers and applause, Father Antonio gathered everyone in the square. With trembling hands, he began to count the money collected. The silence was absolute as the numbers grew. 5,000, 10,000, 15,000. When he finally looked up, his eyes were shining. "We've done it," he announced, his voice breaking with emotion. "And not only that, we've exceeded the amount needed." The square erupted in cheers and tears of joy. In the midst of the celebration, Lucia quietly slipped into the church. She knelt in front of the statue of the Virgin of Hope and, for the first time in weeks, cried. But these were tears of relief, of gratitude, of renewed hope. "Thank you," she whispered, clutching the medal to her heart. "Thank you for not abandoning us." Outside, the celebration continued. The neighborhood of Triana rejoiced, not just in having reached their goal, but in having rediscovered the power of community, faith, and hope. And at the center of it all, a 12-year-old girl had been the catalyst, the beacon that had guided everyone through the darkness. The road ahead would still be difficult. Marta's treatment would be long and exhausting. But now Lucia knew they wouldn't be alone. They had the Virgin of Hope by their side, and an entire neighborhood willing to fight alongside them. Dawn arrived in Triana with a mixture of hope and anxiety. The success of the extraordinary procession and the fundraising had brought new energy to the neighborhood. But now the real battle was beginning. In the small Rodriguez family apartment, Lucia woke up before the alarm went off, her mind already on high alert. She dressed quickly and went to check on Miguel, who was still sleeping peacefully in his crib. Mrs. Dolores, true to her word, had agreed to take care of the little one while Lucia accompanied her mother to the hospital to begin the experimental treatment. "I'll be back soon, champ," Lucia whispered, kissing her brother's forehead. The journey to the hospital was a whirlwind of emotions. Father Antonio, who had insisted on accompanying them, drove in silence, occasionally glancing worriedly at the rearview mirror. In the back seat, Marta, pale but determined, held Lucia's hand tightly. Everything will be fine, my girl, Marta said, her voice barely a whisper. No matter what happens, I'm proud of you. Lucia nodded, unable to speak due to the lump in her throat. The medal of the Virgin of Hope hung heavily on her chest, a constant reminder of the miracles they had already experienced. San Juan de Dios Hospital greeted them with its usual morning bustle. Nurses and doctors moved quickly through the hallways, the smell of disinfectant heavy in the air. At the oncology reception, Dr. Vasquez was waiting for them, his face a blend of professionalism and cautious hope. Good morning, he greeted, shaking Father Antonio's hand and smiling at Lucia before turning to Marta. Are you ready, Mrs. Rodriguez? Marta nodded with determination. More than ever, Doctor. The admission process was swift, almost anticlimactic after all the struggle to get to this point. Before Lucia could even process it, her mother was lying in a hospital bed, hooked up to a series of machines emitting rhythmic beeps. The treatment is intensive, Dr. Vasquez explained as a nurse prepared the first dose, and the next few days will be tough, but this is our best chance. Lucia watched as the clear liquid began to flow through the tube into her mother's arm. Was it her imagination? Or did the medicine glow faintly under the fluorescent lights? She shook her head, dismissing the thought. This wasn't magic, it was science, so the best that money could buy. The first days passed in a blur of hope and fear. Lucia split her time between the hospital and taking care of Miguel, with Father Antonio and Mrs. Dolores taking turns to help. The entire neighborhood seemed to be holding its breath, waiting for news. At first, the signs were promising. Dr. Vasquez spoke of a positive response and tumor reduction. Marta, though exhausted by the treatment, kept her spirits up. It's like I can feel the Virgin working inside me, she confided to Lucia one afternoon as they shared tea in the hospital room. But as the second week passed, things began to change. Marta started to suffer severe side effects, uncontrollable nausea, extreme fatigue, pain that the medication barely eased. Lucia watched helplessly as her mother weakened day by day. One particularly difficult morning, Lucia arrived at the hospital to find her mother in the midst of a crisis. Marta was screaming in pain, her body arching on the bed as nurses struggled to stabilize her. Mom! Lucia cried, running toward the bed. A nurse intercepted her, preventing her from getting closer. I'm sorry, sweetheart, but you have to wait outside, she said firmly but kindly. Lucia was pushed into the hallway, where she came face to face with Father Antonio, who had just arrived. Seeing the panic in the girl's eyes, the priest wrapped her in a protective embrace. Have faith, little one, he murmured. Hope won't abandon us. But as the hours passed and Marta's condition remained critical, Lucia felt something break inside her. Doubt, that silent enemy of faith, began to creep into her heart. That night, when she was finally allowed to see her mother, Lucia barely recognized her. Marta lay motionless, her face gaunt and her skin a grayish tone. The machines around her beeped and buzzed, as if they were fighting to keep her alive. Lucia approached the bed, trembling, and took her mother's hand in hers. It was cold to the touch. Mom, she whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks. Please don't give up, I need you. Miguel needs you. But Marta didn't respond. Her eyes remained closed, her breathing shallow and labored. It was in that moment that Lucia felt something inside her shatter. All the faith, all the hope she had held on to for weeks seemed to evaporate in an instant. With trembling hands, she tore the medal of the Virgin from her neck. Why? She screamed, looking at the small metal image. Why are you doing this to us? You were supposed to help us. Father Antonio, who had been watching from the doorway, quickly approached. Lucia, daughter, calm down, he said, trying to embrace her. But Lucia pushed him away. No, she yelled. Don't tell me to calm down. Look at her, she's dying. Where is your God now? Where is the Virgin of Hope? In a fit of rage, Lucia threw the medal to the floor. The small metal object bounced off the tiles, the sound echoing in the silent room. Father Antonio was speechless, shocked by the child's outburst. Lucia, exhausted and broken, collapsed into a chair, sobbing uncontrollably. That's when something unexpected happened. A high-pitched, steady beep filled the room. The machines connected to Marta began to sound alarms. Code blue, a nurse shouted from the door. Within seconds, the room was filled with medical staff. Lucia was pushed back, watching in horror as the doctors fought to revive her mother. Dr. Vasquez appeared, barking orders as they prepared the defibrillator. Charge to 300, he ordered. Clear! Marta's body jolted with the shock. Lucia squeezed her eyes shut, unable to watch. She felt Father Antonio's arms around her, holding her as the chaos unfolded. The minutes stretched on like hours. Shock after shock, the doctors refused to give up. Lucia could hear Dr. Vasquez muttering, "Come on, Marta, fight in between each attempt." And then, just when it seemed all hope was lost, it happened. A faint, regular beep began to sound. Lucia opened her eyes to see Dr. Vasquez leaning over her mother, a smile of relief on his tired face. "We've got her back," he announced. "It's weak, but she's stable." A collective sigh filled the room. Nurses began adjusting equipment and administering medication, while Dr. Vasquez approached Lucia and Father Antonio. "It was close," he said quietly. But your mother is a fighter, Lucia." "She didn't give up." Lucia nodded, unable to speak. The emotions overwhelmed her: relief, fear, guilt for her earlier outburst. Father Antonio held her tighter, whispering a prayer of thanks. It was then that Lucia noticed something on the floor. The medal of the Virgin of Hope lay there, shining softly under the hospital lights. With trembling hands, she bent down to pick it up. "I'm sorry," she whispered, stroking the small image. "I lost my faith for a moment." Father Antonio knelt beside her. "Faith isn't easy, Lucia," he said softly. "Sometimes it wavers, sometimes it seems to disappear. But if it's true, it always finds its way back." Lucia looked at the medal in her hand and then at her mother, now breathing more steadily. Perhaps, she thought, the true miracle wasn't the instant healing she had hoped for, but the strength to keep fighting, to not give up even in the darkest moments. The following days were a roller coaster of emotions. Marta stabilized, but her condition remained critical. Dr. Vasquez explained that the experimental treatment had caused an unexpected reaction, and that they would need to adjust the protocol. "It's uncharted territory," he admitted. "But the fact that Marta survived this crisis gives us hope. Her body is fighting." Lucia spent every moment she could at the hospital, splitting her time between caring for her mother and Miguel. The neighborhood of Triana, hearing what had happened, mobilized once again. Neighbors took turns bringing meals to the hospital, looking after Miguel, and even cleaning the Rodriguez apartment. One afternoon, as Lucia sat by her mother's bedside, reading to her quietly, she felt a slight squeeze on her hand. She looked up to find her mother's eyes open, focused on her. "My brave girl," Marta whispered, her voice hoarse from disuse. Lucia felt tears welling up in her eyes. "Mom," she sobbed, leaning down to hug her gently. "I thought I'd lost you." Marta smiled weakly. "You'll never lose me, darling. I'm here, fighting for you and for Miguel." It was then that Dr. Vasquez entered the room, a look of amazement on his face as he saw Marta awake and aware. "This is extraordinary," he said, quickly moving to examine his patient. After a few minutes of tests and questions, he turned to Lucia with a cautious smile. "It seems we're seeing the first real signs of improvement. The latest scans show a significant reduction in the tumor." Lucia felt her heart leap. "Does that mean—" Dr. Vasquez raised a hand, urging caution. "Oh, it's still too early to declare victory. The road ahead is long and difficult. But this," he gestured to Marta, "this gives us real reason to hope." That night, when Lucia finally returned home, she found Father Antonio waiting for her at the building's entrance. The priest looked at her with a mixture of concern and hope. "How is your mother?" he asked gently. Lucia, exhausted but with a renewed spark in her eyes, told him about Marta waking up and the hopeful words from Dr. Vasquez. Father Antonio listened intently, a smile slowly forming on his face. "Lucia," he said when she finished, "do you remember what I told you about faith?" Lucia nodded, recalling their conversation in the hospital room. "That sometimes it wavers, but it always finds its way back." "Exactly," Father Antonio nodded. "And sometimes, my child, it's in those moments of doubt, when we think all is lost, that the true miracles happen." Lucia reflected on his words, remembering her moment of crisis, how she had thrown the medal to the floor in a fit of despair. And yet, it was right after that moment that her mother began to fight, when hope began to rekindle. "Father," Lucia said, pulling the medal from her pocket. Do you think the Virgin has forgiven me for doubting? Father Antonio smiled tenderly. Lucia, one faith isn't about never having doubts. It's about moving forward despite them. The Virgin of Hope doesn't need to forgive you because you never truly lost hope, even in your darkest moment. Lucia looked at the medal in her hand, the serene face of the Virgin shining softly under the streetlight. Perhaps, she thought, the real lesson in all of this wasn't about instant miracles or unshakable faith, but about perseverance in the hardest moments. With a deep sigh, Lucia slipped the medal back around her neck. Thank you, Father, she said, hugging the priest. For everything. Father Antonio returned the hug, feeling the weight of the past weeks on the girl's shoulders. Go rest, he said softly. Tomorrow will be another day of battle. As Lucia climbed the stairs to her apartment, she felt a mixture of exhaustion and renewed determination. The fight was far from over, but for the first time in a long while, she felt they had a real chance of winning. The following days brought a series of ups and downs that tested Lucia's newly restored faith. Marta showed signs of improvement, but the treatment remained brutally hard. There were days when the pain was so intense that Marta could barely speak. And Lucia felt helpless, able only to hold her mother's hand and murmur words of encouragement. One morning, while Lucia was helping her mother eat a little soup, Marta looked at her with an intensity that surprised her. Lucia, my dear, Marta said, her voice weak but determined, I need you to promise me something. Lucia felt a knot in her stomach. Anything, Mom. Marta took a deep breath before continuing. If things don't go as we hope, promise me you'll take care of Miguel. That you'll keep going, that you'll live your life to the fullest. Lucia felt tears welling up in her eyes. Mom, don't talk like that. You're going to get better, I know it. Marta smiled weakly. I have faith in that, darling. But I also know life is unpredictable. Promise me, please. With a heavy heart, Lucia nodded. I promise, Mom. But you have to promise me something too. Promise me you'll keep fighting, that you won't give up. I promise, Marta said, squeezing her daughter's hand. That conversation stayed etched in Lucia's mind, a constant reminder of what was at stake. Every day became a battle, not just against the cancer, but against discouragement, exhaustion, and fear. The neighborhood of Triana remained an unshakable pillar of support. Doña Carmen, the baker, regularly showed up with bags full of freshly baked pastries. It'll help you get your strength back, she would say to Marta with a warm smile. Ramon, the young man who had been unemployed, had found a temporary job thanks to a contact from Father Antonio, and he donated part of his first paycheck to help with the additional treatment costs. One afternoon, while Lucia was in the hospital chapel, praying silently, she felt a hand on her shoulder. Turning around, she found herself face to face with Dr. Vasquez. Lucia, the doctor said, his face a mixture of contained emotion, I need you to come with me. I have news about your mother. Lucia's heart skipped a beat. Would it be good news, or... No, she couldn't let herself think of that possibility. With trembling legs, she followed the doctor to his office. Once inside, Dr. Vasquez invited her to sit. Lucia noticed that his hands trembled slightly as he held a folder. Lucia, the doctor began, his voice carefully controlled. We've received the latest test results for your mother. Lucia held her breath, her hand instinctively reaching for the medal of the Virgin. Dr. Vasquez paused, as if searching for the right words. Then slowly a smile began to form on his face. The results are surprising. The tumor has shrunk by more than 50%. It's a response to the treatment that, frankly, we didn't expect to see so soon. Lucia felt the world stop. Does that mean it means your mother is responding exceptionally well to the treatment, Mo? Dr. Vasquez explained. There's still a long way to go, but this is more than we dared to hope for at this stage. Tears began to flow down Lucia's cheeks, but this time they were tears of joy, of relief, of renewed hope. Without thinking, she leaped up and hugged the surprised doctor. Thank you, she sobbed. Thank you, doctor. Vasquez moved, awkwardly returned the hug. Don't thank me, Lucia. Your mother is an incredible fighter. And you've been her rock through all of this. When they finally parted, Lucia was beaming. Can I tell my mother? She asked, eager to share the good news. Dr. Vasquez nodded. Of course. In fact, why don't we go together? I'd like to explain the details to her and discuss the next steps in the treatment. Together, they headed to Marta's room. As they entered, Lucia saw her mother sitting up, gazing pensively out the window. When she saw them, Marta straightened, a spark of worry in her eyes. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice tinged with anxiety. Lucia ran to the bed, unable to contain her excitement. "Mom, the doctor has good news." Dr. Vasquez calmly approached, explaining the test results in detail. As he spoke, Lucia watched her mother's face transform. Worry gave way to astonishment and then to cautious joy. Is it real?" Marta asked, her voice trembling. "Is it really working?" Dr. Vasquez nodded with a smile. It's real, Marta. We still have a long road ahead, but these results are extremely encouraging." Marta extended her arms, pulling Lucia into a tight embrace. Mother and daughter cried together, this time with tears of joy and hope. "We did it, my girl," Marta whispered. "We're winning this battle." Lucia nodded, unable to speak through her emotion. It felt as if a huge weight had been lifted from her shoulders. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to think about the future, about the real possibility that her mother might fully recover. That night, after Marta finally fell asleep with a smile on her lips, Lucia quietly left the room. In the hallway, she found Father Antonio, who had come for his daily visit. "Hi, Father," Lucia said, her face glowing. "I have to tell you something." As Lucia recounted the good news, the priest's face lit up more and more. When she finished, Father Antonio hugged her tightly. "Do you see, Lucia?" he said, his voice filled with emotion. "Hope is never truly lost. Sometimes we just need to go through the darkness to appreciate the light." Lucia nodded, deeply understanding the priest's words. She remembered her moments of doubt, how she had come close to losing her faith, and yet here they were, living what could only be described as a miracle. "Father," Lucia said, nervously playing with the metal around her neck, "I think I understand now. Faith, it's not just about believing when things are going well, is it? It's about holding on to hope even in the darkest moments." Father Antonio smiled proudly. "Exactly, my child. You've learned a lesson that many adults struggle to grasp. True faith is forged in times of trial." Together, they walked to the hospital's small chapel. Lucia knelt in front of the image of the Virgin of Hope, similar to the one they had in the church in Triana. "Thank you," she whispered, her heart overflowing with gratitude. "And for not abandoning us even when I doubted." As she prayed, Lucia felt a peace she hadn't experienced in months. She knew the road ahead would still be difficult, that there would be more challenges to face. But now, armed with stronger faith and renewed hope, she felt ready to face whatever came next. As they left the chapel, Lucia paused for a moment, looking out the window at the streets of Seville. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. It was a beautiful sight, a reminder that even after the darkest days, there is always light on the horizon. "Let's go," Father Antonio said softly. "And we need to share the good news with the neighborhood. Everyone has been praying and waiting." Lucia nodded, a smile lighting up her face. "Yes, they need to know." Everyone was part of this miracle. As they walked together toward the hospital exit, Lucia felt a mix of emotions: relief, gratitude, hope, and, above all, a renewed determination. The battle against her mother's cancer wasn't over, but now they had something powerful on their side: the certainty that miracles, big and small, were possible. The neighborhood of Triana was waiting for them, that community that had come together in the darkest moments. Lucia knew that, no matter what happened, they would never be alone. The strength of hope, faith, and the love of a community had proven to be more powerful than any adversity. As they stepped into the warm Sevillian night, Lucia made a silent promise. No matter what the future held, she would keep that flame of hope alive. For her mother, for Miguel, for all those who had believed and supported them. The girl who had run into the church weeks ago, desperate and scared, now walked with her head held high, ready to face any challenge life might throw her way. The following months passed in a whirlwind of treatments, hospital visits, and an emotional roller coaster. Lucia, now freshly 13 years old, had matured in a way no one could have imagined possible. Her face, though still young, showed a wisdom and strength that went far beyond her years. It was a sunny Sunday morning when Lucia entered the Church of Our Lady of O, hand in hand with her mother. Marta, though still thin and with hair only just beginning to grow back after chemotherapy, walked with renewed strength. Behind them, Miguel, now a lively 3-year-old, ran around playfully, unaware of the importance of the moment. Father Antonio greeted them at the door with a beaming smile. "Welcome," he said, embracing Marta first and then Lucia. "It's wonderful to see you both here." The church was packed. It seemed like all of Triana had gathered for the occasion. Doña Carmen, the baker, waved from her usual pew. Ramon, now with a stable job thanks to Father Antonio's contacts, smiled shyly. Mrs. Dolores, tears in her eyes, gestured for them to sit next to her. When Father Antonio climbed to the pulpit, an expectant silence fell over the congregation. "Brothers and sisters," he began, his voice echoing in the ancient walls of the church. "Today we are here to celebrate a miracle of faith, of hope, and of love." As Father Antonio spoke about Marta's battle, about Lucia's strength, and how the community had come together, Lucia felt tears streaming down her cheeks. But this time, they were tears of joy and gratitude. "And a few months ago," the priest continued, "a young girl ran into this church, desperate and frightened. Today, that same girl sits among us, transformed into an example of faith and perseverance for all of us." Lucia felt her mother squeeze her hand. When she looked at Marta, she saw that she too was silently crying. "Marta," Father Antonio said, addressing her directly, "your struggle has taught us the true meaning of strength. And Lucia, little one, your unshakable hope has been a beacon of light for all of us." The priest paused, looking at the congregation. "But this miracle doesn't belong solely to the Rodriguez family. It is a miracle for our entire community. Each of you, with your prayers, your support, and your love, has been part of this story of hope." When the Mass ended, the square in front of the church filled with people. Neighbors, friends, and even strangers approached to hug Marta and Lucia, to share in their joy and celebrate the victory over illness. In the middle of the crowd, Lucia saw Dr. Vasquez. The doctor, normally serious and professional, smiled broadly as he chatted with some of the parishioners. "Doctor," Lucia called, walking over to him. "Thank you for coming." Dr. Vasquez looked at her warmly. "I wouldn't have missed it for the world, Lucia. Your mother, well, all of you are an exceptional case. You've taught us so much about the power of will and the importance of emotional support in recovery." Lucia nodded, understanding the weight of his words. "Dr. Hunt," she said after a moment, "do you think it was a miracle?" The doctor seemed to ponder for a moment. "Lucia, as a scientist, I believe in facts and evidence. The treatment worked in a way that exceeded all our expectations. But," he paused, looking around at the community celebrating, "if you ask me whether I think something else was at play, something science can't fully explain, well, after all I've seen, I'm open to that possibility." Lucia smiled, grateful for his honesty. At that moment, she felt a hand on her shoulder. It was Marta. "Hi, my girl," her mother said. "There's someone who wants to talk to you." Lucia turned to see a young woman, around 30 years old, looking at her with tearful eyes. "Hello, Lucia," the woman said, her voice trembling. "You don't know me, but I followed your story. You see, my sister was diagnosed with cancer a few weeks ago, and I was losing hope. But your strength, your faith, it's given me the courage to keep fighting." "Thank you." Lucia, moved, hugged the woman without hesitation. "Never lose hope," she whispered. "Sometimes it's all we have, but it's more powerful than we realize." As the celebration continued around her, Lucia stepped away for a moment, seeking a quiet place. She approached the statue of the Virgin of Hope that stood in the square. Looking at the serene face of the Virgin, Lucia reflected on everything they had been through. "I thank you," she murmured, touching the medal that hung around her neck. "For the strength, for the faith, for the hope." She felt a presence beside her and turned to see Father Antonio. "You know, Lucia," the priest said softly, "sometimes miracles aren't grand, spectacular events. Sometimes they are small moments of grace and of love, of community, and you, my dear, have been the catalyst for many of those miracles." Lucia thought about his words. She thought about how the neighborhood had come together, how people who barely spoke before were now like family. She thought about Ramon, who had found purpose by helping others, about Doña Carmen, whose generosity had inspired so many more. "Father," Lucia said after a moment, "do you think things will go back to normal now?" Father Antonio smiled. "No, Lucia, I think we've discovered a new normal, one where we know that together we can overcome any adversity. And that, my dear, is the true miracle." As the sun began to set over Triana, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Lucia looked around. She saw her mother laughing with old friends, her face radiant with health and happiness. She saw Miguel playing carefreely with other children. She saw her neighbors, united by an experience that had changed them all forever. And in that moment, Lucia understood that the journey wasn't over. Life would continue to present challenges and difficult moments. But now she knew, with unshakable certainty, that with faith, hope, and the love of a community, there was no obstacle they couldn't overcome. As night fell over Seville and the stars began to twinkle in the sky, Lucia closed her eyes, grateful for every moment, every tear, every laugh that had brought them to this point. The future was uncertain, but she no longer feared it, because now she knew that the true power of hope lay not just in believing in miracles, but in being part of them. Time passed, as it always does, bringing with it changes and new challenges. 5 years had gone by since that Sunday when Lucia ran into the Church of Our Lady of O, desperate and scared. Now, at 18 years old, Lucia once again stood before the church doors grown, but this time with a serene smile on her face and a suitcase at her feet. It was a warm September morning, and the streets of Triana buzzed with the typical Saturday activity. The aroma of coffee and freshly fried churros floated in the air, mixing with the scent of flowers adorning the balconies. Lucia took a deep breath, filling her lungs with the familiar air of her neighborhood, aware that soon she would be far from all of this. "Are you ready, sweetheart?" Marta asked, placing a hand on her daughter's shoulder. Lucia nodded, turning to look at her mother. Marta, now 5 years cancer-free, radiated health and vitality. Her hair, once stolen by chemotherapy, now fell in soft waves over her shoulders. Her eyes, once clouded by fear and pain, now shone with pride and love. "Almost," Lucia replied. "I just need to do one more thing." With determined steps, Lucia entered the church. The interior was dim, lit only by the glow of candles and the rays of sunlight filtering through the stained glass windows. She headed directly to the image of the Virgin of Hope, the same one before which she had prayed so many times during her mother's illness. She knelt, closing her eyes for a moment. It wasn't a prayer she offered now, but a silent thank you for her mother's life, for the strength she had discovered within herself, for the kindness of her community. "I thought I'd find you here," said a familiar voice behind her. Lucia turned to see Father Antonio, now with completely white hair but still wearing his ever-warm smile. "I couldn't leave without saying goodbye," Lucia said, standing up. Father Antonio looked at her with a mix of pride and nostalgia. "You've grown so much, Lucia, not just in stature but in spirit. Who would have thought that the frightened little girl would become the strong, compassionate young woman you are today?" Lucia felt tears threatening to spill, but she held them back. "All thanks to you, Father. To you and to the whole community." The priest shook his head. "No, Lucia, the strength was always within you. We just helped you discover it." Together they walked toward the church exit. In the plaza, a group of neighbors had gathered. Doña Carmen, Ramon, Miss and Dolores, and even Dr. Vasquez were there to say goodbye. "Our little heroine is off to university," Doña Carmen exclaimed, hugging Lucia tightly. Ramon, now a successful local businessman, handed her a small package. "Oh, so you never forget where you come from," he said with a smile. Lucia opened the package to find a photo album. As she flipped through it, she saw pictures from the past 5 years. The extraordinary procession, celebrations at the hospital, everyday moments in the neighborhood. Each photo was a reminder of the incredible journey they had shared. "Doctor," Vasquez approached, his face a mix of professional pride and personal affection. "Hi, Lucia," he said. "When you decide to specialize, remember that there's a place waiting for you at our hospital. Your experience and compassion would be invaluable in oncology." Lucia nodded, grateful. Her decision to study medicine had been directly inspired by her experience with her mother's illness. and by the dedication she had seen in doctors like Dr. Vasquez. Miguel, now an energetic 8-year-old, threw himself at his sister. "Do you have to go?" he asked, his big eyes pleading. Lucia knelt to be at his level. "Yes, I have to go. But I'll come back often, I promise. And when I come back, I'll tell you all about my adventures." As Lucia said goodbye to each of her neighbors and friends, she couldn't help but reflect on how much things had changed. The neighborhood that had once come together in adversity was now a stronger, more united community in every way. The shared experience had left an indelible mark on them all. Finally, it was time to leave. Marta hugged her daughter tightly. "I'm so proud of you, my girl," she whispered. "Go and conquer the world. But remember, you'll always have a home here." Lucia nodded, unable to speak through the lump in her throat. She picked up her suitcase and began walking toward the taxi that was waiting for her. But before getting in, she stopped and turned to look one last time at her neighborhood, at her people. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for teaching me the true meaning of hope, of faith, and of love. I will carry your lessons with me always." As the taxi pulled away, Lucia looked out the back window. She saw her mother, Miguel, Father Antonio, and everyone else waving goodbye. And above them, the bell tower of the Church of Our Lady of O rose against the blue sky of Seville, a beacon of hope that would always guide her back home. In that moment, Lucia understood that the true strength of hope didn't reside in grand miracles or dramatic moments. It was in the small acts of kindness, in a community coming together in difficult times, in the faith that persists even in the deepest darkness. As Seville faded into the distance, Lucia touched the Virgin of Hope medal she still wore around her neck. It wasn't just a reminder of hard times, but a symbol of everything she had learned and the person she had become. The future stretched out before her, full of possibilities and challenges. But Lucia no longer felt afraid. She knew that, no matter what life threw at her, she would always carry with her the strength of hope, the love of her family, and the wisdom of her community. And so, with her heart full of gratitude and her eyes set on the horizon, Lucia embarked on the next chapter of her life, carrying with her the legacy of hope that Triana had gifted her.